Japan is known as one of the safest countries in the world, quiet streets, strict laws, low crime rates. But behind this facade lies a darker side. Over the decades, people have emerged whose crimes shocked the nation. Serial killers, maniacs, poisoners, and sadists whose stories were so brutal that many tried to forget them. This iceberg will take us from the infamous cases reported in the newspapers to the almost forgotten nightmares preserved only in police archives. Level 1. Futoshi Matsunaga and Junko Agata, the Kite-Kyushu captivity murders. In the mid-1990s, in Fukuoka Prefecture, Futoshi Matsunaga and his partner Junko Agata carried out a series of brutal tortures and murders that left at least 7 people dead. Matsunaga, known for his manipulative charisma, had dominated Agata, a former schoolmate, through years of psychological and physical abuse. Over time, she became both his accomplice and victim, dragged into acts against her own family. Matsunaga's cruelty first emerged in his fraud schemes and affairs, but escalated into sadistic violence. One of his earliest victims was Kumio Toria, whom he lured into his condominium, held captive, and tortured with electric shocks. Matsunaga forced Toria's daughter to participate in the abuse. Kumio eventually died from the torture, after which Matsunaga and Agata dismembered the body and disposed of the remains at sea. The cycle of violence then turned inward on Agata's family. Under Matsunaga's control, Agata helped him murder her own parents, sister, niece, and nephew. Victims were electrocuted, strangled, starved, or forced to kill one another under Matsunaga's orders. In some cases, children were coerced into restraining relatives, while others delivered the fatal blows. Bodies were dismembered, boiled, or dissolved to conceal evidence. For years, Matsunaga kept his victims imprisoned in apartments, using electric shocks, threats, and brainwashing to control them. Neighbors occasionally heard strange noises, but no one intervened. His ability to manipulate ensured silence and obedience until 2002, when a young captive managed to escape and contact police. Matsunaga and Agata were arrested in March 2002. At trial, investigators struggled with the lack of physical remains, but testimonies from survivors revealed the extent of the crimes. In 2005, Matsunaga was sentenced to death for 6 murders and 1 count of manslaughter. Agata was initially sentenced to death as well, but her penalty was later reduced to life imprisonment, with the court acknowledging her subjugation to Matsunaga's control. In 2007, appeals courts upheld Matsunaga's death sentence and confirmed Agata's life term. Matsunaga remains on death row, while Agata serves her sentence in prison. Sakikabara Sato, the Kobe child killer. On the morning of May 27, 1997, a janitor at a junior school in Kobe made a gruesome discovery at the school gates: the severed head of 11-year-old Jun Hase, a boy who had gone missing 3 days earlier. His eyes had been gouged out, a deep cut ran from ear to ear, and inside his mouth was a blood-stained note. Written in red ink, the message taunted the police. "This is the beginning of the game. Try to stop me if you can." It was signed with a strange alias, Sakikabara Sato, a combination of kanji meaning sacred rose and devil. The killing shocked Japan. Just months earlier, the same attacker had carried out brutal assaults on children in the area. In February 1997, 2 schoolgirls had been bludgeoned with a hammer but miraculously survived. In March, 10-year-old Ayaka Yamashita was fatally struck in the head, while her friend Kazumi survived a knife wound to the abdomen. Near each scene, the attacker left animal carcasses as a calling card: a headless pigeon, a mutilated squirrel. Residents began whispering about a child predator who stalked the quiet streets of Kobe. The murder of Jun Hase pushed the case into national hysteria. Days later, newspapers received letters from the self-styled killer, declaring himself the embodiment of destruction and railing against Japan's rigid school system, which he claimed had turned him into an outcast. He threatened to continue killing 3 vegetables a week, his term for random members of the public, if his alias was misread or mocked. Police and media speculated that the killer must be an adult male, strong and intelligent, perhaps in his 30s. When the arrest finally came, the truth stunned the nation. The culprit was not an adult but a 14-year-old boy. His real name was Shinichiro Azuma, though due to Japanese privacy laws, he was referred to for years only as Boy A. Azuma confessed in chilling detail. He had lured Jun by promising to show him a giant turtle near a reservoir, strangled him with a shoelace, then later returned with a saw to decapitate him. He admitted drinking some of the boy's blood, claiming it purified his own. He placed the head at the school gates both as a taunt to police and an act of revenge against the school system he despised. Azuma's diaries revealed an obsession with violence. In one entry after attacking Aoka Yamashita, he coldly described it as an experiment to test how fragile humans are. Another letter to the press spoke of his hatred for education and his need to release rage through pain. Experts described him as highly narcissistic, fascinated by power over life and death. In June 1997, Azuma was sent to a juvenile correctional facility, convicted of the murders of Aoka Yamashita and Jun Hase. He served less than 7 years. Released in 2004 at the age of 21, he later published a memoir titled Zeka, recounting the crimes, sparking outrage that he could profit from the killings. Despite protests, the book became a bestseller, and families of the victims received signed copies with apologies attached gestures that felt cruel rather than remorseful. The Kobe child murders left scars not only on the victims' families, but on Japanese society. The case led to a nationwide debate about youth crime, privacy laws, and criminal responsibility. In direct response, Japan lowered the age of criminal liability from 16 to 14. For many, the true horror lay not just in the brutality of the crimes, but in the revelation that such atrocities had been carried out by a boy barely in his teens. Tatsuya Ichihashi, the murder of Lindsay Ann Hawker. Lindsay Ann Hawker was a 22-year-old English teacher from Brandon, Warwickshire. Bright and ambitious, she graduated with honors in 2006 and moved to Tokyo to fulfill her dream of living in Japan. She kept in daily contact with her family and boyfriend back home, making her sudden silence in March 2007 all the more alarming. When her parents couldn't reach her on March 24 and her colleagues confirmed she hadn't returned home, the alarm bells rang. The investigation quickly uncovered a name: Tatsuya Ichihashi, a 29-year-old man Lindsay had recently met. 4 days before her disappearance, she told her boyfriend about a strange Japanese man who approached her on a train, asking for English lessons. Polite but cautious, she refused to give her number. Still, he followed her home, begged for water, and charmed her with a hand-drawn portrait. Against her better judgment, Lindsay agreed to tutor him. Their official meeting was scheduled for March 24 in a cafe. Surveillance cameras tracked Lindsay and Ichihashi that morning. They spent about an hour at the cafe before taking a taxi to his apartment. The driver recalled Lindsay asking him to wait for a few minutes while she went inside. 7 minutes later, she had not returned, and the cab drove off. She was never seen alive again. 2 days later, police arrived at Ikihashi's residence. They spotted him leaving, but before they could question him, he bolted. Inside his apartment, investigators made a grim discovery. Lindsay's body was stuffed in a sand-filled bathtub on the balcony. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma and signs she fought desperately to survive. What followed was a nationwide manhunt. Despite knowing his name and face, police failed to catch Ichihashi. For over 2 years, he lived as a fugitive. He disguised himself, moving constantly, working odd jobs on construction sites. In a bizarre act of self-surgery, he used scalpels, needles, and thread to alter his own face, even cutting out his moles to avoid recognition. Later, he risked real plastic surgeries, which ultimately betrayed him. Doctors grew suspicious when they noticed surgical scars and false documents, alerting police. The net finally closed in November 2009, when a ferry passenger in Osaka noticed a nervous man in a cap, sunglasses, and mask. Police arrested him before he could escape. It was Ichihashi. At trial, Ichihashi admitted luring Lindsay to his apartment and assaulting her. He claimed he never intended to kill her, saying panic drove him to violence when she threatened to report him. The court rejected his version. He had not called for help, nor attempted resuscitation, but instead buried her body under sand. In 2011, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Kani Kijima, the konkatsu killer. Kani Kijima, born November 27, 1974, was a Japanese fraudster and serial killer who preyed on men she met through konkatsu marriage-hunting websites. Between 2007 and 2009, she poisoned 3 men and was suspected in several other deaths. She grew up in Nakashibetsu, Hokkaido, later attending Toyo University before dropping out. Kijima built a world of lies to attract men. She claimed to be a piano instructor, a food coordinator, the daughter of a Tokyo University professor, and posted photos online of a glamorous lifestyle she did not actually have. She presented herself as the perfect partner, but her real goal was money. Her crimes came to attention in August 2009, when 41-year-old Yoshinori Yuda was found dead in a car in Saitama Prefecture, apparently from carbon monoxide poisoning. The circumstances were suspicious. The keys were missing, and just before his death Yuda had transferred a large sum of money to Kijima. Police discovered she had been romantically involved with him while defrauding him of millions of yen. Investigators soon connected her to 2 other deaths. Takao Terada, 53, was found dead of carbon monoxide poisoning in Ulm after transferring 17 million yen to Kijima. Kenzo Ando, 80, died in a house fire deliberately staged with charcoal briquettes. After his death, Kijima withdrew money from his bank account. Patterns across the cases showed the same scheme. She targeted lonely men, took their savings and left them dead. Kijima was arrested in September 2009, initially on fraud charges, and rearrested in January 2010 on suspicion of murder. Police relied on circumstantial evidence, charcoal briquettes, patterns of fraud and financial transfers. She denied intent to kill, insisting her partners committed suicide voluntarily and the money was given freely. In April 2012, the Saitama District Court convicted her of 3 murders, fraud, and theft, sentencing her to death. The Tokyo High Court upheld the sentence in 2014, and in 2017 Japan's Supreme Court confirmed it, describing the crimes as deliberate and malicious. Since then, Kani Kijima has remained on death row in Tokyo Detention House. Takehiro Shiraishi, Twitter killer. Takehiro Shiraishi, 1990–2025, better known as the Twitter killer, was one of Japan's most notorious modern serial killers. Between August and October 2017, he lured 9 people into his small apartment in Zama, Kanagawa Prefecture, 8 women and 1 man. Most of them were young women who had publicly expressed suicidal thoughts on Twitter. Shiraishi reached out, pretending to offer companionship in death or to help them end their suffering. In reality, he strangled them, raped their bodies, and dismembered them. Shiraishi was born in Tokyo and worked as a scout in Kabukicho, recruiting women into the sex trade. Neighbors later described him as odd and unsettling. In the summer of 2017, he rented an apartment in Zama that quickly became the site of his crimes. When police finally entered the apartment, they were met with a horrifying sight. Body parts from 9 victims stored in coolers, freezers, and toolboxes, with the overwhelming smell of decay seeping through the building. His capture came only after the brother of a missing girl began investigating on his own. With the help of a friend known publicly as Yumi, they used Twitter to arrange a meeting with Shiraishi. The police accompanied them to the apartment. When asked where the missing girl was, Shiraishi casually pointed to a freezer. Inside were the remains of not just one, but several victims. The victims were later identified as Mizuki Miura, 21, Kuraha Ishihara, 15, Shogo Nishinaka, 20, the only male killed because he came searching for his girlfriend, as well as Hinako Sarsuna, 19, Hitomi Fujima, 26, Akari Suda, 17, Natsumi Kubo, 17, Kazumi Maruyama, 25, and Eiko Tamura, 23. All had connections to depression or suicidal ideation, which made them easy prey. During trial, the defense argued that the victims had consented to die. Shiraishi himself admitted guilt but dismissed the consent argument, saying his true motives were sexual gratification and money. In December 2020, he was sentenced to death by hanging. Shiraishi refused to appeal, stating he was prepared for execution. In June 2025, the sentence was carried out in Tokyo Detention Center, ending the life of Japan's Twitter killer. Level 2. Miyuki Yuida suspicious deaths in Tottori. Miyuki Yuida, born 1974 in Tottori, was convicted for 2 murders in Tottori and strongly suspected of involvement in a string of mysterious deaths from 2004 through 2009. Over time, investigators tied her to at least 6 cases involving men she dated or had financial ties with. Her arrest came on November 2, 2009, initially on charges of fraud. Police discovered that each man in her circle had died under odd circumstances. In January 2010, she was formally charged with murder of 2 dates. The evidence was circumstantial: patterns of financial dependency, use of sedatives or sleeping agents, and presence of disturbing details at death scenes. Among the confirmed victims were Kazumi Yabe, 47, found floating off the coast in April 2009, with signs of sedative in his system and sand in his lungs, hinting he didn't simply drown. Another was Hiroki Maruyama, 57, whose beaten body was found in a shallow river in October 2009. His car had visited Yuida's residence days before. Investigators also flagged 4 additional suspicious deaths. Akira Seo, 2004, died hit by a train under circumstances ruled suicide. Shinichi Furuta, 2007, drowned though he could not swim. Huitsu Sakai, 2008, found hanged on a mountain path. And Kazumi Taguchi, 2009, fell into a coma after renting a car from Yuida. All had connections to her, as acquaintances, customers of her snack bar, or men who loaned her money. During trial, Yuida denied intent to kill. She claimed those men died accidentally or by their own hands. The prosecution countered that someone drugged could not end up at suspicious locations unaided. On December 4, 2012, the Tottori District Court sentenced her to death. Appeals failed. In 2014, the High Court confirmed the decision, and in 2017 the Supreme Court rejected her final appeal, upholding the death sentence. While incarcerated, she was held first in Matsu District Prison, later transferred to Hiroshima Detention House. On January 14, 2023, Yuida died after choking on food. She was 49. Jin II, the dog lover serial killer. Jin II, born January 2, 1942 in Chichibu, Saitama, was a Japanese dog breeder turned serial killer. Between April and August 1993, he and his common-law wife, Hiroko Kazama, murdered at least 4 of his clients in Kumagaya, Saitama Prefecture, though suspicions suggest more victims. He died in prison in March 2017 while awaiting execution. Second had a peculiar background. After finishing high school, he worked various jobs in a pachinko parlor, then a restaurant, before eventually building a reputation as a dog breeder. He opened Africa Kennel in Kumagaya and gained fame for promoting the Alaskan Malamute breed. But behind the facade, he was notorious locally for shady business practices, swapping dogs, faking sales, and even allegedly killing dogs and selling replacement ones. To attract victims, Seken and Kazama targeted men who came to their kennel. Seken manipulated clients financially and socially. In 1993, he lured one client, Akio Kawasaki, under the guise of a discussion about a dog purchase. He drugged him with cyanide inside a car, then dismembered his body with Kazama and a reluctant accomplice, Aiko Yamazaki. They disposed of the body parts and burned what remained, scattering ashes into rivers and forests. Seken didn't stop there. He, Kazama, and Yamazaki later targeted a gangster named Yasutoshi Endo, who had been extorting Seken. They laced Endo's drink with strychnine, killed both him and his chauffeur Susumu Nakayama, and dismembered them in Yamazaki's bathroom. When the chauffeur resisted the poison, they let him suffer while driving. He died in convulsions in the car. Another victim was Mitsu Sekiguchi. Someone second had involved financially. He offered her a share in his kennel, then poisoned and killed her with strychnine, and later dismembered her. Kazama's involvement remains debated, but court found she participated in disposing of remains and abetting crimes. Second's style of killing became chillingly systematic. He cut bodies into small parts, burned flesh, and reduced bones to ashes, disposing of evidence in multiple locations. He had a so-called murder philosophy with rules like don't kill for insurance or make the body disappear. He boasted of committing perfect crimes and believed he would never be caught. Police suspicion grew when several clients disappeared after dealings with Second. In January 1995, Second, Kazama, and Yamazaki were arrested. Though many bodies were too badly burned for DNA tests, investigators located bone fragments, watches, personal items, and more across rivers and forests. Survivors and Yamazaki's testimony filled gaps in the tangled case. In 2001, Second and Kazama were both sentenced to death. Kazama's appeals failed, and her sentence was upheld in 2009. Second's death sentence was confirmed as well. He never walked free. In November 2016, he fell ill, was hospitalized inside prison, and died of multiple organ failure on March 27, 2017, in Tokyo Detention House. Yoshinori Yuda, the Osaka dog lover murders. Yoshinori Yuda was born in 1955 in Yao, Osaka. He came from a family that owned a liquor shop. His life took a drastic turn when, at around age 30, he became guarantor for a friend's large loan. That friend vanished, leaving Yuda with the full debt. His parents bailaid him out, but forbade him to freely access the family inheritance. After that, people say his personality shifted. Yuda developed an obsession with dogs. He rented farmland in Shigeru, Nagano Prefecture, and set up a dog breeding and training operation, calling himself a canine expert. He advertised heavily, approached dog lovers, accepted investments, and gained clients. But behind this business lay a darker side. Between July and October 1992, some sources say into 1993, Yuda invited people to his dog breeding grounds. Under the guise of business or friendship, he poisoned them using succinylcholine, a paralytic agent used in veterinary medicine. The victims were people he knew or clients who had financial ties with him. His confirmed victims include Ko Kashiwai, a 22-year-old who disappeared after being promised part-time work; Hiroshi Sido, whom Yuda had quarreled with over rumors about Sido's sexuality; Sanpei Fujiwara, drawn in through shared dog interests; Sachiko Takahashi, who transferred a large sum and went to meet Yuda; Nobuko Shiji, after she reportedly discovered Takahashi's body. When vital signs of a pattern emerged, police opened a special unit. On January 26, 1994, Yuda was arrested in connection with these disappearances. He confessed to the poisonings, saying he'd killed some because they demanded refunds, others because they had discovered too much or contacted him at the wrong time. All bodies were eventually buried on that farmland. He stood trial, initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence and his own statements worked against him. In March 1998, Yuda was sentenced to death by Osaka District Court. Appeals were dismissed. The Osaka High Court in 2001 upheld the verdict, and Japan's Supreme Court in 2005 confirmed the sentence. To this day, he remains on death row, serving the penalty for 5 deliberate murders. Shigeru Nishimoto, the 4 robbery murders. Shigeru Nishimoto, born October 22, 1976, executed January 29, 2009, carried out 4 robbery murders between January and September 2004 in Aichi and Nagano prefectures. He grew up in Iida, Nagano, in a relatively comfortable household but had trouble in school, often skipping classes. As an adult, he worked briefly in forestry, though colleagues described him as unreliable. A car accident in 2002 left him with a herniated disc, ending his steady employment and worsening his finances. By 2004, Nishimoto was heavily in debt from rent, personal spending, and loans. To his wife, he pretended to be the son of a wealthy businessman, hiding the truth of his situation. Desperate for money, he turned first to robbery and then to murder. His first killing came on January 13, 2004 in Nagoya. After his car ran out of gas, he hailed a taxi driven by 59-year-old Yasuo Minato. During the ride, Nishimoto attacked the driver, decapitated him, and stole about $18,000. The killing shocked investigators with its brutality. On April 27 in Ida, he broke into the home of 77-year-old Mai Shimanaka, an elderly woman he had some acquaintance with. He strangled her and stole $15,000 along with a piggy bank. In August, Nishimoto escalated again. On the 10th, he used a long kitchen knife to stab 69-year-old Hitoshi Kato to death in his home and fled with $260,000. Less than a month later, on September 7, he knocked on the door of 74-year-old Eiko Kimura in Takamori, apologized for the intrusion, then stabbed her repeatedly and escaped with $6,000. His spree ended on September 13, 2004, when he attempted another burglary. The alarm went off, and police quickly arrested him. He confessed to the 4 murders, though during his appeals he also claimed responsibility for a 5th killing in Fukushima in 2003. Investigators were unable to substantiate that confession. In May 2006, the Nagano District Court sentenced him to death. He withdrew all further appeals in January 2007. On January 29, 2009, Shigeru Nishimoto was executed by hanging at the Tokyo detention house. Yasunori Suzuki, serial killer in Fukuoka. Yasunori Suzuki was born on March 22, 1969, in Agata, Fukuoka Prefecture. From early on, he developed an unusual fixation on women's underwear, reportedly stealing them in junior high. He later married and had a child, but the marriage ended in September 2004, leaving him emotionally and financially vulnerable. Between December 2004 and January 2005, Suzuki attacked 3 women in Fukuoka Prefecture. His first known victim was 18-year-old Nana Kubota, whom he attacked in a park in Iizuka late one night. He raped and strangled her, attempting afterward to steal her wallet, but was interrupted by a passerby. On December 31, he stabbed 62-year-old Toshihiko Hanaka in Kite Kyushu with a kitchen knife, taking her bag and wallet. The final murder occurred on January 18, 2005, when 23-year-old Keiko Fukushima was attacked in Hakata in the early morning. He planned to rape her but abandoned that when he feared witnesses, instead stabbing her and stealing her belongings. Police traced one victim's mobile phone to a used dating service line in Nagata. On March 10, 2005, they arrested Suzuki while he was attempting to embezzle money. He was in debt to the tune of $8 million, largely from gambling, alcohol, and paying for online dating services. At his trial, prosecutors sought the death penalty. In November 2006, the Fukuoka District Court sentenced him to death. His appeals to higher courts failed. The Fukuoka High Court upheld the ruling in 2008, and Japan's Supreme Court confirmed it in 2011. His final appeal for a retrial was rejected. On August 2, 2019, the 50-year-old Suzuki was executed by hanging at Fukuoka Detention House. Hiroki Hidaka, the taxi driver murders. Hiroki Hidaka, 1962-2006, grew up in Miyazaki Prefecture. As a boy, he was quiet, well-behaved, and academically gifted, but his ambitions collapsed when he failed to gain admission to the University of Tsukuba. He later entered Fukuoka University, but dropped out before finishing. By the 1990s, he had fallen into heavy debt, drinking, and frequenting prostitutes. In 1989, he moved to Hiroshima, working as a taxi driver. He married in 1991, fathered a daughter in 1993, but his family life soon disintegrated after his wife was committed to a mental hospital. In April 1996, his spiral of frustration and financial troubles turned into violence. On April 18, He lured a 16-year-old girl into his taxi, drove her to a secluded spot, and strangled her with his necktie. He robbed her small amount of cash and left the body in a remote area. The method, a sudden attack from behind with a tie, became his signature. On August 13, he targeted a 23-year-old sex worker in Hiroshima. Again, he strangled her with a tie, stole her belongings, and dumped her body. Just weeks later, on September 7, he struck again. His victim was a 45-year-old woman, killed with a belt and left half-clothed to slow identification. A week later, on September 14, he abducted a 32-year-old prostitute. She tried to escape, but Hidaka gave chase in his taxi, caught her, and strangled her in the same fashion. He robbed her and disposed of the body in another remote area. Hidaka's murders all followed the same chilling pattern: strangulation with a tie or belt, theft of money, and leaving victims in secluded places. This earned him the grim nickname, the Tie Strangler, in local media. He killed 4 women in just 6 months. Police arrested him on September 21, 1996. Hidaka confessed, describing the crimes with disturbing calm. He was indicted for 4 counts of murder and robbery. On February 9, 2000, the Hiroshima District Court sentenced him to death. Unlike many Japanese death row inmates, Hidaka declined to appeal, accelerating the process. On December 25, 2006, Hiroki Hidaka was hanged at Hiroshima Detention House, executed alongside 3 other men. His lawyer later criticized prison officials for denying him access to his client in the final hours before execution. At 44 years old, Hidaka's life ended by the same state punishment he had inflicted on his victims: sudden strangulation. Level 3. Masakatsu Nishikawa, the snack bar murders. Masakatsu Nishikawa was born in 1956. His life before the killings was already marked by crime, repeated thefts, and prison sentences. In November 1991, he was released from prison and settled for a short time in the apartment of a former cellmate in Kurashiki, Okayama Prefecture. Only days later, he began committing assaults. He tried to strangle a shop owner, threatened a woman with her child, and stole from acquaintances. For about 40 days, he drifted across western Japan, living in hotels under false names and preparing for bigger crimes. In December 1991, Nishikawa began targeting managers of small snack bars, late-night establishments often run by women and vulnerable to lone customers. His method was calculated. He would enter the bar, ask the manager to turn off the neon sign and lock the door, then strike once they were alone. Victims were strangled or stabbed, and he robbed them of cash before fleeing. He changed clothes frequently and used surnames of ex-prison acquaintances as aliases to avoid detection. On December 13, he killed a woman in Hyogo Prefecture. 2 days later, in Hiroshima, he murdered another snack bar manager. On December 18, in Matsu, he strangled 55-year-old Fumiko Takahashi, stealing around 200,000 yen. His 4th victim, in Tottori Prefecture on December 28, was killed in the same way. Within just 2 weeks, 4 women were dead in a trail stretching across western Japan. Police eventually connected the cases by the distinctive pattern of closed bars, missing cash, and victims left inside locked premises. His movements between cities, use of multiple aliases, and links to prison acquaintances also drew suspicion. He was arrested soon after and confessed to the crimes, though later he claimed alcohol clouded his memory. In September 1995, Nishikawa was convicted of 4 murders and robberies and sentenced to death. Appeals dragged on for years, but in 2010 the Supreme Court confirmed the sentence, ruling that his actions were premeditated and ruthless. On July 13, 2017, Masakatsu Nishikawa was executed by hanging at Osaka Detention House, alongside another condemned inmate. He was 61 years old at the time of his death. Susumu Nakayama, paroled killer who killed again. Susumu Nakayama was born January 13, 1948 in Shinjuku, Tokyo. His criminal path began early. In 1969, he participated in a violent crime that led to killings, theft, and arson. He was convicted and sent to prison with a death sentence, but in an appeal his sentence was commuted to life. After about 18 years, he was paroled in 1991. Free again, Nakayama attempted a normal life. He learned carpentry skills in prison and worked in construction after release. He settled in Osaka, moved around, and started a relationship with a woman who was estranged from her husband. Over time, tensions built between Nakayama, his girlfriend, and her husband over divorce and custody of children. In February 1998, while still under parole, Nakayama struck. One night he ambushed his girlfriend's husband and the husband's girlfriend on a street in Toyonaka, Osaka. Armed with sashimi knives, he stabbed both repeatedly. The husband was decapitated. The girlfriend also died from her wounds. Nakayama attempted to flee but was intercepted after colliding with a small motorbike. Arrested on February 19, 1998, he confessed, saying the killings were driven by resentment toward the husband and the conflict over divorce. The court rejected his defenses. His attacks were deemed planned and ruthless. In November 2001, the Osaka District Court sentenced him to death. Appeals failed. Both the High Court in 2003 and Supreme Court later upheld the verdict. While awaiting execution in Osaka Detention House, Nakayama's health declined. In 2013, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and transferred to the Osaka Medical Prison. He died there on May 15, 2014, before the death sentence could be carried out. Tetsuyuki Morikawa, the parole killer. Tetsuyuki Morikawa was born on April 10, 1930 in Tenmei, Kumamoto Prefecture. His early life was unstable. His father was murdered when he was young. His mother remarried and then abandoned him, and he was passed among relatives. He dropped out of school early and soon fell into petty crime, including assault and embezzlement. Around 1958, Morikawa married and the couple had 2 sons. But the marriage was violent. He lost control through gambling and drinking, abused her and pawned her belongings. One night, he threw both his wife and eldest son into a stream and assaulted them. Fearing for their lives, X divorced him in 1962, taking the children. Not long after, Morikawa tracked her down and murdered his mother-in-law. She died. His wife survived. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to life imprisonment in 1962 for the murder and attempted murder. While in prison, he openly insisted he bore no remorse. In 1976, after 14 years, he was paroled. He moved back in with relatives but refused steady work, spent his days drinking, and got into fights. In 1978, he violated the terms of parole by attacking his aunt and uncle, so he was sent back to prison. He was paroled again in 1984, placed under supervision, and assigned to work as a laborer. But during that time, he began planning revenge. By 1985, Morikawa had drawn up a hit list of relatives, starting with his ex-wife and extending to her family, the judge who sentenced him, and even a passerby who intervened during his first murders. He stashed money, escaped supervision, and fled to track down his targets. On July 22, 1985, he purchased a sashimi knife and all, then attempted to break into an aunt's house. That failed. The next night, he entered the home of another relative and her adopted daughter. He waited until they slept, climbed in through a window, and stabbed them repeatedly. A died after being stabbed dozens of times. B was wounded in multiple places. He stripped their bodies and attempted to hang them, but blood made him slip and he abandoned the effort. He robbed valuables and fled. Workers investigating their absence discovered traces leading to the crime scene, and fingerprints matched Morikawa's. On July 28, 1985, police arrested him at a racecourse. In confession, he admitted targeting his ex-family, claimed he was trying to force someone to reveal his ex-wife's location, and said he didn't originally intend robbery. In 1986, Morikawa was tried and sentenced to death, convicted of multiple counts of murder, assault, and robbery. His appeals were dismissed in High Court and the Supreme Court by 1992. On September 10, 1999, he was executed by hanging at Fukuoka Detention House. Sadame Sugimura, the poisoner in Kumamoto. Sadame Sugimura was born December 29, 1911. Her marriage to a man named Noboru was troubled. He was a heavy drinker, had mistresses, and often beat her when she complained. Over time, she fell into poor health, and after a hysterectomy and his death, reportedly by methanol poisoning, Sadame's financial situation grew strained. She looked for ways to survive. In November 1960, Sadame struck first. She laced her mother-in-law's drink with parathion, and Kura Sugimura collapsed and died in the street. At first, the death was ruled a stroke, but Sadame rifled through her possessions afterward. Emboldened, on December 14, she invited a neighbor, aged 45, to share a meal of horse meat she prepared. She had poisoned the meat. The victim fell seriously ill and later died. Hours later, Sadame poisoned another acquaintance, Fujiko Yamamoto, giving her miso soup spiked with poison. Yamamoto survived but became paralyzed. Sadame even tried to exploit that, pretending to care for Yamamoto while rifling through her money. On December 28, Sadame hosted Kiyono Akamura, 58, and her husband. She gave Kiyono a bowl of natto that had been poisoned. The woman soon began vomiting and died before help arrived. Authorities grew suspicious. They exhumed bodies, conducted second autopsies, and found unmistakable traces of poison. Under interrogation, Sadame confessed. She said her motive was financial gain. Investigators found in her home chemical residues, contaminated dishes, suspicious food samples, and records of purchases of materials consistent with poisoning. During the trial, she insisted some deaths were accidents, but the evidence was too strong. On March 28, 1963, she was sentenced to death for 4 murders. While on death row, Sadame converted to Buddhism. She reportedly offered spiritual guidance to other inmates and expressed calm acceptance. On September 19, 1970, Sadame Sugimura was executed by hanging at the Fukuoka Detention House, ending the life of Japan's calculated poisoner. Level 4. Takeshige Hamada, the insurance scheme killer. Takeshige Hamada was born March 10, 1927 in Noda, Kagoshima, now Izumi. His early life was harsh. His father died when he was 5, leaving a debt his mother and uncle had to repay. Hamada's mother fell ill, forcing him to leave school early to care for the household, gathering firewood, carrying water, doing laundry. Though he attended only 3 years of elementary school, he showed aptitude in arithmetic. He later held jobs at a kamaboko, fish cake, shop, and during wartime worked in airplane factories and railroad tasks. But after the war, drift and petty crime dominated much of his adult life. He spent many years in prison for theft, vandalism, and other offenses. Before his murder spree, he had already served roughly 17 years behind bars. The murders began in 1978. Hamada and his wife, along with 2 accomplices, planned to kill for life insurance payouts. On March 25, 1978, they targeted a 28-year-old relative of his wife. They drugged or intoxicated her, dragged her into a bathtub, and drowned her. The death was initially ruled heart failure. The Hamadas collected about $1.5 million in insurance. A few months later, on July 1, they turned to a 16-year-old son-in-law. Hamada had the youth inhale paint thinner until he lost consciousness, then carried him to a canal and drowned him. They claimed the death was accidental. They secured about $10 million from that insurance. In 1979, Hamada's conspirators A and B proposed a third killing, ensure a 37-year-old man, get him drunk, and arrange a hit and run. Hamada agreed. That night, the victim was loaded into a dump truck and later run over on a quiet street behind Kyushu University. The group intended to fake an accident. But when the insurer rejected the premium as excessive, the plan failed financially. Police arrested the group on September 27, 1979. After continued interrogation, all 3 confessed to the murders and financial scheme. Investigators also discovered that Hamada's wife and even his in-laws had died in similarly suspicious ways. During the trial, the court called Hamada greedy, systematically calm, shows no remorse. On March 29, 1982, Hamada was sentenced to death, while his accomplices received 15 years each, later reduced. Appeals to overturn the sentence were dismissed. In 1988, the Supreme Court affirmed the death penalty, citing the premeditated nature of the crimes and Hamada's own confessions. Hamada remained on death row for decades, repeatedly petitioning for retrial. On June 26, 2017, at age 90 and still awaiting execution, he died of asphyxiation. At his death, he was the oldest inmate on Japan's death row. Toshihiko Hasegawa and Masamichi Ida, the insurance triple murders. Between November 1979 and December 1983, in Aichi and Kyoto prefectures, Toshihiko Hasegawa and his employee Masamichi Ida carried out a scheme of murder for insurance payouts. They plotted and executed 3 killings, disguising them as accidents or drownings, before they were eventually arrested, tried, and executed. Hasegawa, born in 1950, originally ran a small car repair business that ran into serious financial trouble. Ida, born in 1942, worked under him. Hasegawa devised a plan. He would pick victims who already had life insurance, lure or manipulate them into settings where their deaths could be staged, and then collect the insurance money. Their first known victim was Terayoshi Eguchi, age 20. On November 19, 1979, Hasegawa and Ida invited Eguchi on a fishing trip. In the early morning, they forced him overboard from a boat and left him to drown. They attempted to cash in on the policy, but found that Eguchi had left a suicide note, which nullified their claim. Next came Akio Harada, a trusted driver for Hasegawa. In January 1983, Harada was induced to drive his truck alone. Under Hasegawa and Ida's plan, his truck was stopped in Kyoto, and Harada was bludgeoned to death with an iron bar. They dumped his body back in the driver's seat, then rolled the truck off a cliff and reported it as an accident. Finally, to settle the debts of a loan shark, they targeted Yashio Sakikabara. On December 25, 1983, Hasegawa and Ida beat Sakikabara to death with a metal bar, stole his valuables, tied an anchor to his body, and dropped it into the sea to make it disappear. After the third murder, investigation tightened. The pattern of victims, insurance plots, connections to Hasegawa and Ida, and confessions of their accomplice led police to arrest them. In December 1985, they were convicted on 3 counts of murder. Hasegawa and Ida received the death penalty, while the accomplice got a prison term. On death row, Hasegawa converted to Christianity and began writing letters of apology to victims' families. He and one of the victims' brothers, Masaharu Harada, corresponded and eventually met in prison. Ida, for his part, accepted his sentence without further appeals, writing that he believed he deserved to die. Ida was executed in November 1998. Hasegawa lost his final appeal in 1993, petitioned for clemency, supported by letters from victims' families, but was ultimately executed on December 27, 2001, at Nagoya Detention House. Kiyotaka Katsuta, the firefighter killer. Kiyotaka Katsuta was born on August 29, 1948, in Kizugawa, Kyoto. On the surface, he led a respectable life. He worked as a firefighter and even received public honors. But beneath that veneer, he hid a darker side. For around a decade, between the early 1970s and 1982, he is believed to have murdered and robbed multiple people across Western Japan. His confirmed victims number 8, but Katsuta himself confessed to more, possibly as many as 22. He typically preyed on bar hostesses and chauffeurs, using strangulation or shooting, often during burglaries or during encounters he engineered. His crimes were opportunistic yet cold in execution. In late 1982, Katsuta's spree escalated. On October 27, he ran over a police officer with his car, stole his handgun, and began eluding capture. Days later, on October 31, he attempted a robbery that ended in shooting a man dead. The very next day, he shot another man, though that victim survived. Authorities designated the case Metropolitan Designated Case 113 as it unfolded. On January 31, 1983, Katsuta was arrested while threatening a man with a firearm. At first, police believed his murders were connected only to thefts, but during interrogation he confessed to several additional killings. Investigations uncovered his dual life, firefighter by day, ruthless killer by night. While imprisoned, Katsuta met a woman named Yuko Kurusu, a Christian. He adopted her mother's name and legally changed his surname to Fujiwara. Despite his changing name, he remained isolated from other inmates, mistrustful and reserved. In his appeal, the Supreme Court of Japan upheld 2 death sentences in 1994, the first time the court ever confirmed dual capital sentences. One was for 7 murders between 1972 and 1980, the other for the 1982 killing. On November 30, 2000, Katsuta was executed by hanging at Nagoya Detention House. As he entered the chamber, he asked to briefly remove his blindfold to see his chaplain. Under recitation of Buddhist scripture, he spoke aloud the names of his victims and expressed remorse. Then the blindfold was replaced and he was led to the gallows. Kobayashi, the hotel murderess. Kobayashi was born October 20, 1908, in the village of Tamagoi in Saitama Prefecture. She was the second of 7 children in a poor farming family. After completing only elementary school, she went to work as a housekeeper in Tokyo. Around 1930, she married Hidesuke Hayashi, a local shopkeeper. The couple had 2 children. One died in infancy, the other survived, and their marriage stalled under economic hardship and her husband's illness. Life became harder during and after the war. She and her husband ran a small store and also dealt in contraband goods like rubber and rice. To supplement income, Kao sold gakabo, a type of confection. Along the way, she began an affair with a police officer named Madekiro Nakamura, who occasionally visited their home during investigations. He promised her a better life if she left her husband. In 1952, her husband died suddenly of an illness, which an autopsy attributed to cerebral hemorrhage. Suspicion swirled, but authorities closed the case. No proof linked her to the death at the time. Accepting she needed more control, she moved into speculative real estate around hot spring towns, onsen areas. In 1956, she bought a shop in Shibuya and began dealing with locals and small inn owners. In late 1958, she targeted a failing Inn called Hotel Nihonkaku, owned by Kamasuke and Ume Yukata, aged 53 and 49. Kamasuke was under financial strain and had accepted a loan from Kao's contacts, including Ume. When Ume refused further negotiations on loan terms, Kao decided to eliminate her. In January 1960, Kao colluded with an accomplice, Mitsuyoshi Anuki, promising him money and sexual favors in exchange for murder. In the dead of night, Anuki strangled Ume in her sleep with a linen cord. The body was moved to the boiler room and hidden under concrete. In November, Kao pushed Anuki again, this time to kill Kamasuke by poisoning. The first attempt across December failed when the target refused to finish his food laced with hydrochloric acid. Then, on December 31, during a quiet evening, Kao snuck up behind Kamasuke and assaulted him. Anuki then joined and stabbed him in the neck. They concealed the corpse and quietly claimed he had gone to Tokyo for business. Rumors of the disappearance grew. Newspapers reported on the missing improprietors. Suspicion fell on Kao and Anuki. On February 20, 1961, both were arrested. After her arrest, Kao confessed not only to the 2 recent murders but also to poisoning her husband in 1952 with cyanide, implicating her prior affair and motives. During the trial, she claimed some deaths were accidental or that others acted alone. Nakamura was tried but acquitted due to lack of evidence. Kao and Anuki were convicted of 3 murders in July 1966. Both were sentenced to death. On June 11, 1970, Kao Kobayashi, at age 61, and her accomplice were executed by hanging at Tokyo Detention House. She was one of the earliest women executed in post-war Japan for serial murder. Level 5. Sakichi Furutani, the elderly robbery murderer. Sakichi Furutani was born February 16, 1914 in Tsushima, Nagasaki. His early years were turbulent. His mother died when he was young, his father moved away, and he was raised by relatives. From childhood, Furutani displayed antisocial behavior, stealing from classmates, bullying, and in one case beating a teacher. After being expelled from junior high, he drifted into petty crime. Over the decades, he was repeatedly imprisoned for theft, fraud, and extortion. By the mid-1950s, he had already spent close to 3 decades behind bars. In 1951, he is suspected to have participated in 2 murders of elderly men in Fukuoka Prefecture, acts that were later tied to him though evidence was scarce. After release and parole, Furutani disappeared from public view for years. Then, between October 30 and December 12, 1965, he launched a brief but gruesome killing spree across western Japan. His victims were mostly elderly men living alone in Osaka, Kyoto, Shiga, Hyogo, and Fukuoka prefectures. He struck when opportunity arose, in homes, construction sites, or isolated streets. The attacks were sudden strangulation, stabbing, or blunt force, and often followed by theft, though he usually stole only small sums or valuables. One of his last acts was in Kobe on October 30, where he strangled a 57-year-old and took his watch and cash. He continued for weeks, murdering or attempting murder against people aged mostly over 50. In Nishinomiya, he attacked 2 salvagers and was caught in the act by a police patrol. At first, he denied the charges, claiming a mysterious accomplice, Oka, was the real killer. He insisted robbery was incidental. He supposedly killed when refused food or shelter. Police linked him to at least 8 confirmed murders, 2 attempted murders, and suspected him in 4 more earlier deaths, bringing his total tally to as many as 12. Evidence included fingerprints, matching victim profiles, and consistent modus operandi. In court, he challenged the accusations, but the courts found the linkage overwhelming. In 1971, the Kobe District Court sentenced him to death. Appeals to higher courts were rejected, and by 1979 his sentence was finalized. After years in Osaka Detention House, on May 31, 1985, Furutani was executed by hanging. At that time, he was the oldest person ever executed in Japan, a record later broken. Reports from prison described him as alternating between calm, monk-like demeanors and bursts of violence. He died alone, with no known allies or friends, and with only a former investigator maintaining contact by letters. Genzo Kurita, the Cliff Killer and Necrophile. Genzo Kurita was born November 3, 1926 in Akita Prefecture, into a large, impoverished family. His early life was troubled. He dropped out of school, drifted into petty crime, and struggled to find stability in post-war Japan. His criminal behavior escalated over time, from theft and fraud into rape and murder. His first known murders occurred in February 1948, when he killed 2 women with whom he had intimate relationships. Over the next years, he operated across Chiba, Tochigi, and Shizuoka prefectures. On August 8, 1951, Kurita murdered and raped a 24-year-old woman while her infant lay nearby. He later engaged in necrophilia with her body. In October that same year, he targeted a 29-year-old woman, raping and murdering her, then threw her 3 children off a cliff called Osen Koregashi. 1 child survived the fall, 2 died. On January 13, 1952, Kurita entered a home where a 63-year-old woman and her 24-year-old niece lived. He first killed the older woman with a knife, then strangled the niece and raped her corpse. At the scene, investigators discovered his fingerprints on a discarded murder weapon, which helped tie him to the crime. Authorities arrested Kurita on January 16, 1952. In the ensuing trials, he was convicted on multiple counts, first in Chiba for the final double murder, then in Utsunomiya for the other 6. He appealed his sentences, but by October 1954 he withdrew his appeals, citing mental instability and self-harm tendencies. He was held at Miyagi Prison awaiting execution. On October 14, 1959, Kurita was executed by hanging. He had by then been sentenced to death twice over 8 proven murders. His case was later cited in discussions in Japan's national diet over capital punishment and criminal psychology. Hayato Imai, the nursing home balcony murders. Hayato Imai, born 1991, worked as an EMT before being employed at a nursing home in Seiwaiku, Kawasaki. Between November and December 2014, 3 elderly residents died after falling from balconies at the S. Amo Kawasaki Yukamachi facility. The deaths initially seemed like accidents or sudden collapses, but soon raised suspicion. When police reviewed the timeline, they found that Imai was the only staff member present during all 3 incidents. On February 16, 2016, he was arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder. During interrogations, he first confessed to the killings, claiming he was troubled at the time and found caring for the elderly stressful. Later, he recanted, saying the confession had been coerced. The prosecution argued that Imai abused his position. He used his access and trust to push residents off balconies, staging them as accidental falls. One ruling noted that the recorded confession matched undisclosed details of the crime scenes, lending it credibility. The defense maintained there was insufficient proof, suggesting the deaths might have been suicides or misadventures, and that Imai might have been acting under mental duress. On March 22, 2018, the Yokohama District Court found him guilty of murdering 3 aged persons in his care and sentenced him to death. The court deemed the crimes not only deliberate but especially heinous given the victim's vulnerability. Imai appealed and the case moved to the Tokyo High Court. His appeals are ongoing. He remains on death row, awaiting the final verdict. We've explored the iceberg of Japanese serial killers, from the cases that shocked the entire nation to the terrifying stories almost no one remembers. These crimes left their mark on court records and still cause chills even today. That's all for now. Write in the comments which icebergs you'd like to see next, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a like.